The day started like any other in the Dahmer household. The sun had just risen. Jeffrey Dahmer, a successful architect, was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping his morning coffee while skimming through the newspaper. His neatly combed hair and crisp shirt reflected his meticulous nature. Susan Dahmer, his wife, a strikingly beautiful woman with a magnetic presence, moved gracefully around the kitchen, preparing breakfast. She wore a silk robe that shimmered in the sunlight. They had been married for 29 years, and tonight, they were supposed to celebrate their anniversary with a grand party. The house was already buzzing with excitement, the decorations laid out in preparation, and the catering team scheduled to arrive soon. Jeffrey looked up from his paper, a warm smile on his face. "Can you believe it's been 29 years, Susan? Time flies, doesn't it?" Susan replied absent-mindedly, her attention focused on the pancakes she was flipping. "But don't forget, we still have a lot to prepare for tonight's party." Jeffrey couldn't help but notice Susan's distant tone. She had been preoccupied lately, often distracted and less engaged in their conversations. He attributed it to the stress of organizing their anniversary celebration. He watched her closely, sensing an undercurrent of tension that he couldn't quite place. As the morning went on, Jeffrey's sense of unease grew. Susan's phone buzzed several times, and each time she quickly picked it up, her voice hushed and urgent. Jeffrey tried to brush it off, convincing himself it was probably related to the surprise she mentioned for the party. But the nagging feeling persisted. "Who keeps calling you? You seem pretty busy," Jeffrey asked, trying to sound casual. Susan forced a smile, slipping her phone into her pocket. "Just some last-minute arrangements for tonight. Don't worry about it." Jeffrey nodded, but the suspicion gnawed at him. He decided to distract himself by focusing on the party preparations. He stepped outside to check on the garden, where a team of decorators was setting up fairy lights and arranging flowers. The garden was a beautiful extension of their home, meticulously landscaped with blooming roses and neatly trimmed hedges. Their neighbors, the Bennetts, stopped by to offer their congratulations. Lisa Bennett, a close friend of Susan's, hugged Jeffrey warmly. 29 years. You two are such an inspiration." "Thanks, Lisa. It's been quite a journey," Jeffrey replied, glancing back at the house where Susan was still on the phone, her back turned to him. Inside, Susan hung up the phone and took a deep breath. She glanced at the clock, her mind racing. She had to make sure everything was perfect for tonight. But it wasn't just the party that occupied her thoughts. The phone calls were from Larry, a man she had met months ago at a charity event. Their affair had started innocently enough, but it had quickly escalated into something more intense. Now, the guilt and excitement were a constant turmoil inside her. As the day progressed, Jeffrey's unease turned into a gnawing anxiety. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He decided to take a break from the preparations and went for a walk around the neighborhood. The familiar sights and sounds usually brought him comfort, but today they felt overshadowed by the storm brewing in his mind. He ran into Frank, his old college friend, who lived a few blocks away. They chatted briefly about their families and work, but Jeffrey's thoughts kept drifting back to Susan. "You seem distracted, Jeffrey. Everything okay?" Frank asked, noticing his friend's distant look. "Just a lot on my mind with the anniversary party tonight," Jeffrey replied, trying to sound upbeat. "Well, you and Susan are the perfect couple. I'm sure everything will be great," Frank said with a reassuring smile. Back at home, Susan was making final arrangements for the party. She checked the guest list, coordinated with the caterers, and supervised the decorators. But her mind was elsewhere. She kept replaying her conversations with Larry, feeling a mix of excitement and dread. In the afternoon, Jeffrey returned home and found Susan sitting in the living room, looking lost in thought. He sat down beside her and took her hand. "Susan, is everything really okay? You seem different." Susan looked into his eyes, her heart pounding. She wanted to tell him the truth, to end the affair and focus on their marriage. But the words wouldn't come. "I'm just tired, Jeffrey. It's been a lot of work preparing for tonight." Jeffrey squeezed her hand, trying to reassure her. "We'll get through this together, like we always have." The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity. The caterers arrived, and the house filled with the delicious aromas of gourmet food. Guests began to arrive, their laughter and chatter filling the air. Jeffrey and Susan greeted them warmly, playing the role of the perfect hosts. Finally, the evening arrived, and the Dahmer residence was abuzz with preparations for the party. Jeffrey Dahmer moved through the house, ensuring everything was perfect. He adjusted the floral arrangements, checked the champagne glasses, and exchanged pleasantries with the catering staff. The doorbell rang, startling him from his thoughts. That must be the first guest, he thought, heading to the door with a welcoming smile. Jeffrey opened the door, his smile freezing as he took in the sight before him. Standing there was a towering, intimidating big dark man with a smug grin plastered across his face. He wore a leather jacket and exuded an air of menace. "Can I help you?" Jeffrey asked, his voice tinged with confusion and unease. The stranger leaned against the doorframe, his grin widening. "Hey, loser, I'm taking your wife on a wild night out and will satisfy her until morning. You can't say no." Jeffrey's heart sank as he saw Susan descending the staircase behind him, wearing a revealing dress that left little to the imagination. Her hair was styled provocatively, and she wore a bold red lipstick that Jeffrey had never seen on her before. She looked at him with a mix of defiance and excitement. Susan reached the bottom of the stairs, her heels clicking on the polished floor. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Today's gonna be so much fun. I'm leaving, honey. Don't wait for me for dinner. I can't miss him today. We can celebrate later." Jeffrey stood there, stunned and speechless, as the reality of the situation hit him like a freight train. His wife was leaving with another man, right in front of his eyes, on their anniversary. The room seemed to spin around him, the voices and laughter from the party preparations fading into a dull roar. The stranger, sensing Jeffrey's shock, chuckled. "What's the matter, Jeffrey? Didn't see this coming?" He wrapped an arm around Susan's waist, pulling her close. Jeffrey felt a surge of anger and humiliation. He wanted to yell, to stop them, but he was rooted to the spot, his mind racing. Susan turned to the stranger, whispering something in his ear that made him laugh even louder. As they walked out the door, Jeffrey heard the sound of laughter from the living room, where their friends and family were gathered, unaware of the drama unfolding at the front door. He felt a wave of nausea, the betrayal cutting deep. Inside, the party was in full swing. Jeffrey's best friend, Tom, noticed the look on Jeffrey's face and approached him. Tom was a tall, burly man with a kind heart. He had known Jeffrey and Susan for years and had always admired their relationship. "Jeffrey, everything okay?" Tom asked, his brow furrowed with concern. Jeffrey forced a smile, trying to regain his composure. "Yeah, just a little overwhelmed. Susan had to step out for a bit." Tom didn't look convinced but nodded. "If you need anything, you know where to find me." Jeffrey nodded, appreciating his friend's support. He wandered back into the living room, where the guests were mingling, oblivious to the storm that had just passed. He plastered on a smile, engaging in small talk with the guests, but his mind was elsewhere. Meanwhile, in a corner of the room, Lisa Bennett, Susan's close friend, noticed something was off. She had seen the exchange at the door from a distance and felt a pang of worry. Lisa had always been intuitive and could sense when something was wrong. She decided to keep an eye on Jeffrey, ready to step in if he needed support. As the evening wore on, Jeffrey found it increasingly difficult to maintain the facade. He excused himself from the party and retreated to his study, closing the door behind him. He sank into his chair, the weight of the betrayal crashing down on him. He stared at the framed photos on his desk, reminders of happier times, now tainted by the night's events. He picked up his phone and scrolled through his contacts, his finger hovering over Tom's name. He needed to talk to someone, to make sense of what had just happened. But before he could make the call, the door to his study opened, and Lisa stepped in. "Jeffrey, I know something's wrong. Talk to me," she said softly, closing the door behind her. Jeffrey looked up, his eyes filled with pain. "Susan, she left with another man, right in front of me." Lisa's eyes widened in shock. "Oh, Jeffrey, I'm so sorry. I had no idea." Jeffrey ran a hand through his hair, struggling to hold back tears. "I don't know what to do, Lisa. Everything feels like it's falling apart." Lisa crossed the room and sat down beside him, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "We'll figure this out, Jeffrey. You're not alone in this." The rest of the night passed in a blur for Jeffrey. The party continued, but for him, it was a hollow charade. He made excuses, slipped back into the role of host when necessary, but his mind was miles away, grappling with the shock and betrayal. As the last guests left and the house grew quiet, Jeffrey stood alone in the living room, the remnants of the celebration around him. He stared at the door, where Susan had walked out with another man, and felt a cold determination settle in his heart. "This isn't over," he whispered to himself, his eyes hardening with resolve. "They will regret this." The calm before the storm had passed, and now the storm was here, promising a path of vengeance and reckoning. Jeffrey muttered to himself, his voice low and filled with resolve. "They think they can just walk all over me? I'll show them what a big mistake they made." Jeffrey knew he needed a clear head to devise a plan. He walked to his study, a place where he had always found solace and clarity. The room was filled with architectural models and blueprints, symbols of his meticulous nature and strategic mind. He sat at his desk, turning on the lamp that cast a warm, focused light on his workspace. He opened his laptop and began gathering information on Susan's lover. It didn't take long to find him. Larry Jensen, a local businessman with a reputation for shady dealings. Jeffrey's fingers flew over the keyboard as he delved deeper into Larry's background, uncovering his vulnerabilities and weaknesses. Financial troubles, illicit affairs, and a fragile reputation. Larry was not as invincible as he seemed. Jeffrey leaned back in his chair, a plan forming in his mind. He needed allies, people who could help him execute his revenge without leaving a trace back to him. He picked up his phone and contacted a few trusted friends who specialized in various unsavory activities. These were friends he had helped in the past, and they owed him favors. It was time to call them in. First, he called Sam, an old college friend who had turned into a private investigator. Sam had a knack for digging up dirt and gathering intel discreetly. When Jeffrey explained the situation, Sam didn't hesitate. "I've got your back, Jeffrey. I'll get all the dirt we need on this Larry guy." Next, Jeffrey reached out to Carlos, a tech wizard who had once helped him with a security breach at his firm. Carlos could hack into almost anything and make it look like an accident. "Consider it done," Carlos said. "I'll start with his financials and see what I can find." Finally, Jeffrey called Maria, a formidable woman with connections in the underground world. Maria owed Jeffrey for getting her out of a tight spot years ago, and she was more than willing to repay the favor. "Leave it to me," she assured him. "I'll handle the more physical aspects of the plan." As the hours passed, Jeffrey's plan began to take shape. He felt a dark satisfaction as he envisioned Larry's downfall. He knew it wouldn't be easy, and there would be risks involved, but he was willing to take them. The betrayal had awakened something in him, a side he never knew existed. He was no longer the mild-mannered architect. He was a man on a mission. Susan and her lover, Larry, were enjoying their wild night out, oblivious to the storm brewing back at home. They laughed and danced at an upscale club, thinking they had the upper hand. The music was loud, the drinks were flowing, and they moved together seamlessly on the dance floor. Little did they know, their nightmare was about to begin. The club was packed with revelers, the lights casting an array of colors over the writhing crowd. Larry, with his confident swagger, led Susan to a quieter corner where they could talk without shouting over the music. "This is the best night ever," Larry laughed, a wicked gleam in his eyes. "Your husband must be losing his mind right now." Susan smirked, leaning into him. "He'll get over it. Besides, he needed a wake-up call. He's been so complacent for years." Larry pulled Susan closer, his eyes gleaming with mischief. "Well, you're with me now. Let's make this night unforgettable." The next morning, as the first light of dawn crept into the room, Jeffrey's plan was ready. He had all the information he needed and the support of his trusted allies. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. This was the turning point. The calm before the storm had passed, and now the storm was here. Jeffrey was ready to unleash it, and he would stop at nothing to see his revenge through. Larry and Susan decided to head back to his place. The drive was filled with laughter and teasing, but as they pulled into Larry's driveway, their jovial mood was shattered. There, illuminated by the harsh glare of the outdoor lights, stood Jeffrey, calm and composed, with a glint of malice in his eyes. "Evening, Larry." "Susan, did you have a good time?" Jeffrey's voice was unnervingly calm. Larry sneered, trying to regain his composure. "What's the matter, Jeffrey? Can't handle a little competition?" Jeffrey smiled, a dangerous edge to his voice. "Oh, I'm more than capable. In fact, I think it's time you learned a lesson." Before Larry could react, Jeffrey signaled to his friends, who emerged from the shadows like specters. Sam, Carlos, and Maria moved swiftly, overpowering Larry with practiced ease. They tied him up with zip ties, his struggles futile against their strength. Susan watched in horror as her lover was subdued, her mind racing. The night had taken a terrifying turn she had never anticipated. She stepped forward, her voice shaking. "Jeffrey, what are you doing? Let him go." Jeffrey turned to her, his expression cold and unyielding. "You wanted excitement, didn't you? Well, here's your chance." Sam, the private investigator, moved to Jeffrey's side. He had a calm, professional demeanor, his eyes scanning the surroundings for any signs of trouble. Carlos, the tech wizard, stood by the car, his laptop open on the hood, monitoring the security cameras he had hacked to ensure they wouldn't be disturbed. Maria, with her imposing presence, stood guard, her expression fierce and unapproachable. Larry struggled against his restraints, his voice a mix of anger and fear. "You can't do this. Let me go." Jeffrey leaned in close, his voice a deadly whisper. "This is just the beginning, Larry. You thought you could humiliate me? Now you'll see what real humiliation feels like." As Susan watched the scene unfold, a horrifying realization dawned on her. She had underestimated Jeffrey's resolve and his capacity for vengeance. Her excitement turned to fear as she saw a side of her husband she had never known existed. "Jeffrey, please," she pleaded, tears streaming down her face. "This isn't you. You don't have to do this." Jeffrey's eyes met hers, and for a brief moment, she saw a flicker of the man she once loved. But it was quickly replaced by a steely determination. "You made your choice, Susan. Now it's my turn." Larry was dragged into the house, his protests muffled by the gag Maria had expertly tied around his mouth. The house, once a sanctuary of comfort, now felt like a trap closing in. They led him to the basement, a space that Jeffrey had transformed into a place of reckoning. The cold, concrete walls and the dim lighting added to the oppressive atmosphere. Jeffrey's friends secured Larry to a chair in the center of the room. Sam set up a camera, its red light blinking ominously. Jeffrey stepped forward, a cruel smile playing on his lips. He turned to Susan, who stood at the top of the stairs, frozen in fear. "You wanted to wake me up, didn't you?" Jeffrey said softly. "Well, consider me awake. Now, you'll both learn the consequences of betrayal." Larry's defiance turned to despair. "You'll pay for this, Jeffrey," he yelled through the gag. Jeffrey smirked. "I doubt that. But you will, Larry. You will." Jeffrey began to methodically outline his plan, detailing how he would expose Larry's illegal activities and ruin his reputation. He described the evidence Carlos had gathered, the financial records that would implicate Larry in embezzlement and fraud. Jeffrey's voice was calm, almost clinical, as he explained the downfall he had meticulously orchestrated. Susan's horror grew with each word, realizing that Jeffrey's vengeance would leave no stone unturned. Her lover would be destroyed, and she would be left to pick up the pieces of her shattered life. As the reality of their situation set in, Larry's defiance turned to despair. He slumped in the chair, his eyes wide with fear. Susan stood in the shadows, tears streaming down her face, knowing that their nightmare was just beginning. Jeffrey stepped back, satisfied with the fear he had instilled. "Welcome to your new reality," he said softly, turning away from them. "This is only the beginning." The trap was set, and there was no escape. The atmosphere inside the Dahmer house was tense and foreboding. The once cozy living room now felt like a prison. The dim lighting cast eerie shadows on the walls, creating an environment thick with dread. Larry was tied to a chair, struggling against his restraints, while Susan stood nearby, paralyzed with fear and regret. The smell of sweat and fear permeated the air. Larry's face was contorted with anger and fear. "You're insane. Let me go," he screamed, his voice echoing through the house. Jeffrey remained calm, his demeanor icy. "Oh, I'm just getting started. You see, Larry, nobody humiliates me and gets away with it." Jeffrey's plan was as methodical as it was ruthless. He had spent hours gathering every bit of incriminating evidence against Larry. With the help of Carlos, the tech wizard, he had hacked into Larry's financial records, uncovering a series of fraudulent transactions and illegal activities. "Did you really think you could hide this?" Jeffrey asked, waving a stack of documents in front of Larry's face. "Your employer will be very interested to know where all their money went." Larry's eyes widened in horror as he realized the extent of Jeffrey's knowledge. "You can't do this," he whispered, his voice cracking. Jeffrey's smile was devoid of warmth. "Oh, I can. And I will." Jeffrey picked up his phone and began making calls. He contacted Larry's employer first, his voice steady and confident as he laid out the evidence of embezzlement. The reaction on the other end of the line was predictable: shock, anger, and a promise of immediate action. Next, Jeffrey called Larry's family, detailing the extent of his deceit and betrayal. Each call was a nail in the coffin of Larry's reputation. Susan watched in horror as Jeffrey dismantled Larry's life piece by piece. Her mind raced with guilt and fear. She had never imagined that her actions would lead to this. "Jeffrey, please, this has gone too far," she pleaded, tears streaming down her face. Jeffrey turned to her, his eyes cold. "Too far? This is justice, Susan. You chose him over our life together. Now you'll see what he truly is." In the midst of the chaos, Sam, the private investigator, monitored the situation from a nearby room, ensuring that no one would interrupt. He had known Jeffrey for years and had never seen him like this. A part of him admired Jeffrey's resolve, while another part worried about how far he would go. Carlos, glued to his laptop, continued to send out emails and messages, making sure that every piece of dirt on Larry reached the right people. He was the silent executor of Jeffrey's revenge, his fingers flying over the keyboard with precision. Maria, standing guard by the front door, kept an eye out for any signs of trouble. She was a formidable presence, her loyalty to Jeffrey unwavering. She had her own reasons for wanting to see Larry suffer, reasons she kept to herself. Larry's defiance began to crumble. "You'll ruin me," he said, his voice barely a whisper. Jeffrey's gaze was unwavering. "That's the point. You took everything from me, Larry. Now it's my turn." As dawn approached, Jeffrey knew it was time for the final blow. He walked over to Larry, who was now silent, his spirit broken. "I hope you enjoyed your little escapade, Larry, because now you'll pay for it." Jeffrey left Larry tied up, ensuring the authorities would find him in a compromising position. He had arranged for an anonymous tip to be sent to the police, complete with all the evidence they needed to arrest Larry for his crimes. The humiliation would be public and complete. Susan, broken and humiliated, watched as Jeffrey set the scene. "Jeffrey, please. I didn't mean for this to happen," she sobbed, her voice filled with despair. Jeffrey looked at her, his expression hard. "You made your bed, Susan. Now you have to lay in it." As the first rays of sunlight crept into the house, Jeffrey gathered his friends. "It's done," he said, his voice heavy with finality. They nodded, understanding that their part in this saga was over. With a final glance at Larry and Susan, Jeffrey walked out of the house, his friends following close behind. The sound of police sirens in the distance signaled the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Jeffrey knew that his actions would have consequences, but for now, he felt a grim satisfaction. He had taken back control, and no one would ever humiliate him again. The night of reckoning was over, but the repercussions would echo for a long time to come. As the police arrived and the chaos unfolded, Jeffrey walked away, ready to face whatever came next with a heart hardened by betrayal and revenge. In the weeks that followed, the fallout from that fateful night reverberated through their lives. Larry's life was in shambles. His career and personal life lay in ruins. Susan, ostracized and ashamed, struggled to pick up the pieces of her shattered existence. The Dahmer house, once a symbol of stability and warmth, now felt like a relic of a past life. Jeffrey moved through the rooms with a sense of detachment, the echoes of the past haunting each corner. His friends, ever loyal, checked in frequently, offering support and companionship. Larry sat in a dingy apartment, the walls bare and unadorned. His once pristine suits were now rumpled and stained. The phone rang incessantly, each call a reminder of the world collapsing around him. He picked up the receiver with a trembling hand, his voice hollow and defeated. "Hello?" Larry answered, his voice breaking. "Larry, this is Lisa from your former employer," came the clipped response from the other end. "We've received the evidence of your financial misconduct. You're terminated, effective immediately. Expect a lawsuit for damages." Larry's hand shook as he slammed the phone down, his face buried in his hands. The weight of his downfall was crushing. The few remaining contacts he had turned their backs on him, and even his family was hesitant to offer solace. Susan, once the center of a luxurious life, found herself grappling with a new reality. The community that had once embraced her now shunned her, whispers of her betrayal following her like a shadow. Her attempts to salvage her social standing and rebuild her life were met with cold shoulders and judgment. One afternoon, she sat in a small cafe, her face buried in her hands. The barista, a young woman with sympathetic eyes, approached her with a cup of coffee. "Here's your coffee," the barista said gently, placing the cup in front of Susan. "It's on the house. I know things are tough right now." Susan looked up, her eyes red and weary. "Thank you. I just don't know where to start." The barista smiled warmly. "Sometimes, you have to start small, one step at a time." Susan nodded, grateful for the kindness amidst the harshness of her reality. She took a deep breath and sipped the coffee, finding a small bit of comfort in the simple gesture. Jeffrey was at his office, immersed in work, when his friend Mike came by for a visit. The office, filled with the clatter of keyboards and hushed conversations, contrasted sharply with the chaos of Jeffrey's personal life. Mike leaned against the doorframe, his expression a mix of concern and curiosity. "Jeffrey, are you okay?" Mike asked, his voice laced with genuine worry. Jeffrey looked up from his desk, a faint, weary smile on his face. "I'll be fine," he said, his tone steady. "It's time to move on." Mike nodded, stepping further into the room. "I know you've been through a lot. If you need anything, you can count on me." Jeffrey appreciated the offer, though his heart was heavy. "Thanks, Mike. It means a lot." Jeffrey embraced new opportunities, finding solace in his work and the support of his friends. He poured his energy into his career, taking on challenging projects that reignited his passion. His work was not just a distraction, but a path to personal growth and redemption. Jeffrey attended a networking event, his demeanor transformed from the man broken by betrayal to a figure of strength and resolve. The event was bustling with energy, a mix of industry professionals and eager entrepreneurs. Jeffrey moved through the crowd with a renewed sense of purpose, engaging in lively conversations. One of his colleagues approached him, a look of admiration in their eyes. "Jeffrey, I heard about your recent projects. They're incredible. How did you manage to turn things around so quickly?" Jeffrey smiled, his confidence evident. "Sometimes, you have to go through hell to find yourself again," he said. "I've learned to focus on what truly matters." His words resonated with those around him, and he began to rebuild his reputation and professional life. He started mentoring younger architects, sharing his experiences and wisdom, helping them navigate their own challenges. Jeffrey sat in his office, reflecting on the turbulent months. His space was a blend of professional order and personal comfort, a symbol of his recovery. The phone rang, and Jeffrey picked it up, his voice steady. "Hello?" It was his old mentor, Professor Reynolds, who had been following Jeffrey's journey. "Jeffrey, I just wanted to say I've been following your progress. It's remarkable how you've turned things around." Jeffrey leaned back in his chair, a sense of accomplishment washing over him. "Thank you, Professor. It's been a tough road, but I've learned a lot about myself along the way." Susan sought therapy and support groups, trying to make sense of her actions and rebuild her self-worth. One evening, she attended a support group meeting, where she shared her story with others facing their own struggles. The room was filled with empathetic faces, each person battling their own demons. The therapist, a calm and reassuring presence, addressed the group. It's important to acknowledge your feelings and take responsibility for your actions. Healing begins with understanding and forgiveness. Susan, her voice trembling, shared her story. I've made so many mistakes. I'm trying to find a way forward, but it's hard. A fellow group member, with a kind smile, spoke up. We all make mistakes. What matters is what you do next. Keep moving forward, one step at a time. Susan left the meeting with a glimmer of hope. She realized that rebuilding her life would be a long and challenging process, but it was a journey she had to undertake. As the days turned into weeks, Jeffrey and Susan continued to navigate their separate paths. Jeffrey found satisfaction in his professional achievements and personal growth, while Susan began to rebuild her life, albeit slowly and with much effort. Jeffrey sat at his desk, reflecting on the turbulent months. The pain of betrayal lingered, but it no longer held him captive. He looked out the window, watching the city come to life as the sun set, casting a warm glow over everything. Sometimes, you have to go through hell to find yourself again, Jeffrey said to himself. And sometimes, that journey makes you stronger than you ever thought possible. With a renewed sense of purpose, Jeffrey prepared to face whatever the future held, ready to embrace the next chapter of his life.